Folks, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Mark Tyra. I know him quite well, and he is an awesome presenter. And I think that you're going to learn lots, and I'm really looking forward to the series. And I think the big thing for me that I'm really excited about is the company that Mark works for is called Summit Solutions, and they work with Excel every day. And I think that is a huge positive. I work with Excel most days, but not every day. Mark literally uses it every single day. And so, yeah, without much further ado, Mark, can I hand over to you? Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Shane. Yeah, guys, welcome very much to the Excel Essentials webinar course. Just to explain a bit about it, we've basically taken our daily courses, which we do on site, our beginner, intermediate daily courses, and combined them into this one webinar course. So basically it's going to take you all the way through from the beginner section through to an intermediate level. So even though this course is applicable to the first time Excel user, it will also be highly beneficial for those of us self-taught Excel users. Most of us fit into that category, who have learned what we've had to just by a need of pressure to get something out, but we've got a number of gaps in our Excel skill set. And so if you're wondering whether this course will be too simple for your particular level, I can guarantee that even in this first session, which starts at the very beginning, you'll definitely pick up a couple of skills. One of the recent attendees on our daily course said the following. It says, even though I work on Excel extensively every day, I still found value and learned new things on the beginner course. And that was Roxanne from TD Administrative Services up in Joburg. And so basically, whatever level you're at, I guarantee you that this course will plug those holes that potentially we've got in our skill set, and then to set you up for any advanced course thereafter. As Shane alluded to, there is a workbook which we'll be working through, but I'll get to that at a little later stage. At this point though, what's always useful for me is to find out what level people are at who are attending this course. And obviously I can't literally run around the room because I can't see you. So it'd be nice to do a poll at this stage, Shane, as to the kind of level that people would say they are at, obviously on Excel.
Okay, lovely, Mark. I'm going to jump in then. Thank you very much. I'm going to run this as a poll, and this is one area where I do think a webinar is actually better than a live session, because we can literally have, and you might be a bit staggered to know this, but we can have literally up to 1,000 attendees online, eh? And I could literally run this poll, and in a couple of seconds I'd be able to give Mark the feedback. So guys, we're doing this right now. Won't you just select one of those options? There are 4. Just select one of those, please. Either you're a first-time Excel user, and I know that some of them you might want to tick more than one, but just tick the most appropriate one, if you know what I mean. The second one is have used Excel a bit, not a frequent user. Third one, work in Excel at least once or twice a week. And then the last one, you're a daily Excel user. Use it literally every day. And so why don't you just, that's going to be very helpful feedback for us in this course and for going forward. So I'm just going to give you, Mark, you'll be interested to know we've really got 60% of the field have voted.
Okay,
Somebody's got their, let me just I'll give you the results in a sec. I just want to see, Donald, yeah, I see you've got your hand up. I'm putting it down. Why don't you just send me a quick message if there's something that you want me to respond to you on. But right, so I'm going to close the poll, and we've got up to 70% have voted. Normally we get 80%, but anyway, that's fine. It's a first poll. Hopefully it will improve as we go along. And I'm going to share results, and I'm going to include this in the recording just for anybody who's maybe tuning in late or whatever and would like to see this. So here we go. Results of our first poll there. My current Excel proficiency. We have got, there wasn't a single person who opted for that first time Excel user option, Mark, so we've got 0% there.
Okay, cool.
And then the next big favorite, well, the overwhelming majority have said daily Excel user. Sure. So that's 78%. That's great. And then you've got 11%, even 11% for the other 2 options, used Excel a bit, not a frequent user, and then work in Excel at least once or twice a week. So your majority, the guys are using Excel every day.
Okay.
So back to you.
That's good to know up front. Thank you so much, Shane. Cool. So up front, if you're still having a cup of coffee, a late cup of coffee for the morning, I'm going to just ease into the this particular course by just giving a bit of history on Excel itself. And so if we had to ask ourselves the question, what is Excel? It's basically an electronic spreadsheet program that's used to store, organize, and manipulate data. And as most of you daily Excel users, you're probably doing one, if not a combination of all of those things. And probably a huge section across, as a banner across this entire definition would be to do reporting, which is a key component to Excel, and we will touch on that later on in the course. Where it all began, though, was to try and get the spreadsheets that were used for accounting, the old paper-based spreadsheets. Those of you who did accounts may very well recognize this from the school days. And the idea was to get this into an electronic format. The advantages were obvious. You could obviously do automated calculations. If you made a mistake, you wouldn't have to put a line through it. You would simply be able to make an edit and continue on. And so that was the driving force behind creating this electronic spreadsheet. Microsoft were not the first to do so. They're very good at taking somebody else's idea and claiming it as their own. So this is a bit of a timeline as to how the spreadsheet has evolved. The very first spreadsheet that popped onto the scene was a program called VisiCalc. And as the name suggests, it was basically a visual interactive calculator. Here's a screenshot of what that looked like. And as you can see, we would recognize this as a modern day spreadsheet, but obviously just in a very simple form. And this was the breakthrough in creating the electronic spreadsheet, was to create these columns across the top, which are labeled alphabetically, and these rows down the left-hand side, which are labeled numerically. And if you combine the two, you get an alphanumeric grid reference, and you can select a cell and make an edit within that cell. And that was a breakthrough for the spreadsheet. From that point on, there was a program called Lotus 123. Now you might have used it if you are one of the older attendees. Otherwise, you may have heard about it. And this was their very first product offering. It was created by IBM. They basically bought out VisiCalc and created their own brand of the electronic spreadsheet. And you can see the basic concepts are the same. Columns across the top, rows down the left-hand side, and some commands starting to sneak in here, which we are familiar with. So like copy, file, print, graph, that kind of thing. Now, Lotus were pretty slow to get their product onto a Windows platform. And so Microsoft saw the potential of what a spreadsheet could do for them, both as a flagship product as well as financially. And so they got a massive team of engineers to basically mimic and replicate Lotus and more. And so this was the first product offering of Microsoft. You can see here, what I like about this slide, memory used was only 11 kilobytes. If you know much about memory, that's next to nothing really. When you take a snap on your phone these days, you use over 1,000. But that was their first product offering. They were very quick to seize the advantage of being on a Windows platform, and every couple of years they brought out new releases. And so you can see here, there's the next one down the line. We start to recognize a few of these commands now, even from the Word environment, so bold, italics, left align, right align, and then the good old Sigma sign, which is our classic AutoSum, probably the most recognized symbol in Excel. Then after bringing out a couple of releases every couple of years, they fast became the spreadsheet of choice, definitely by the year 2000, and pretty much left Lotus and all the other competitors behind. There was one quite significant leap, and that was between the year 2003 and 2007. And so if I can just quickly pop up those two screenshots. There we go. Now these two screenshots here represent the huge jump that they took 4 years to complete. You'll notice on the left-hand side, we have what we call toolbars, which we used to stack on top of our screen, both in Word and PowerPoint, Excel, all the Office products. And that was now changed, or has been now changed since 2007 to these ribbons. So you click on a menu item to display the various different ribbons. Took a bit of getting used to for those of us who were around when that change happened, but I think they made the right call there. In addition to that, the whole file structure changed. So I don't know if you're aware, but your file that you save has a file extension to it, which basically tells your computer what type of file it is. So if it's a Word document, it's .doc, D-O-C. If it's an Excel document, it's XLS. Now, since 2007, Microsoft have added an X on the end of that, which basically is a compression component to the file. So when you save a big file, it actually automatically compresses it. In the old days, we had to use something like WinZip or 7-Zip to actually compress the file to be small enough to be able to email it to somebody else, whereas now that compression happens automatically. Another significant change specifically to Excel now was the number of columns and rows. Back in 2003, we had a maximum of 64,000 rows and 256 columns. That is now increased from to over 1 million rows and 16,000 columns. So the working area, even though most of us don't dive into those depths, has been significantly increased. And both people, process, and transactional data, it was a huge, huge advantage for them. We're now sitting on version Office 2016, or otherwise known as Office 365, which is the kind of monthly rental version, which enables you to do cloud computing, to be able to save all your data into the cloud. Here's a screenshot of what that looks like. And you can see that even we've got all these additional bells and whistles, which we'll be covering during the duration of this course, the concept of columns and rows has remained, and I'm sure will remain right to the very end of the spreadsheet. So that was a founding feature of the spreadsheet and continues to be the key component to Excel itself. And just to elaborate on that briefly, if I take a very basic screenshot of Excel, we have a cell reference here of C4. I can then plug any value into that cell. Let's say a value of 48. I can go to any one of my cells. Now I've got over 1 million by 16,000 to choose from. That's a massive selection to choose from. I'm going to go just next door here to cell E6. I can reference that cell with a very simple formula. It then computes that for me. This cell now becomes completely dependent on that one there. And so when I change the value in C4, this one automatically changes. Now that's obviously very simple. Most of you daily Excel users, you're probably familiar with that. But that very fact that you can get any cell in Excel to reference any other cell enables it to be the most powerful program in the world today, because I can pretty much build anything that I need. And that is why, even though there are literally hundreds of thousands of applications out there, Excel is still the most widely used. So that's a nice little introduction to what this program Excel is all about. At this point, I'm going to take you now to our workbook. Sorry, I just had to flick through the windows there to get to it. This is a workbook which Shane was alluding to earlier that you are able to download. And every section that we're going to be covering, I don't know if you had a chance to look at the actual course layout, you'll notice there are sections detailed there of what we're going to be covering. That basically has its own tab at the bottom here, and we'll be progressing through these tabs, and you can then follow along with me while I do the presentation. Now, it's quite tricky to achieve this if you've only got a single monitor. So the best setup, if you're able to, and maybe you'd only be able to do this next week when we continue with the course, would be to have a secondary monitor that you'd be able to have the presentation on, and then your primary monitor where you can actually run through this particular workbook. So as I go through it, then you'd be able to almost follow along with me and practice as you go. You'd obviously also be able to download this at a later stage and potentially download the video file that's been recorded at the moment, and then follow along again. But it might be an idea in future to be able to do that. If there's a whole group of you doing it, maybe just set up one monitor that's got the webinar going, and then on your own personal laptops, you could then follow along with me. If you don't have that set up for now, though, then you can just sit and watch. If you do, then please feel free to follow along with me. So right up the front, we're going to do a little bit of an Excel overview of terms. Now, even though some of us have worked in Excel for many years, we may not be familiar with all the terms on how we refer to the different components of our Excel workbook. So this is our Excel workbook. When I save a file, it relates to that workbook. So every file that's saved is referring to Excel as a workbook. Now, a single workbook has multiple worksheets. So at the bottom here, you'll see I've got many, many worksheets. If you have downloaded the file, you'll see that yours ends at the red spectrum. Mine continues all the way through the rainbow to the purple spectrum, and that is because this is a little demo of what the overall Excel Essential course has got to offer. And at the end of this session, when we get to formatting cells, so at the end of the first session, which is the first color of our rainbow, we will then have a sneak peek at some of the other features that I'll be covering in the next couple of weeks. And so these are worksheets, and multiple worksheets can be added to a single workbook. Then, as I've already referred to, from its inception, we've got these columns and rows. These are my column and row headings, and I can then go and select a combination of a column, so column D, and say row 5, and that gives me a cell reference. That cell reference will be displayed in what we call the name box. And so here I've got that cell D5 selected, and that there is my now active cell. At the top of our spreadsheet, we have these ribbons. Each ribbon has its own group of commands, which is separated into what we call command groups. And so if I go to a particular ribbon, I have these various different command groups, and within there, I have commands which I can then apply onto data within my spreadsheet. Then in addition to your command groups, you'll notice there's a limited space to display the common commands. So what we also have is this little arrow pointing down to the right, which is called our dialog launcher. And so if you can't find features which are applicable here to what you're trying to achieve in your spreadsheet, you can click on this dialog launcher. It will then open up the dialog box, and you would then be able to potentially find more features that you are looking for over and above the shortcuts which are displayed. Then finally, this is our formula bar here, and if you select any cell in the spreadsheet, it will display the information in the formula bar, even if there is nothing that you can visually see at the point in time. So you can see in column B, there's clearly data, and that's being displayed in the formula bar. And the reason why I've done that is because I didn't want you to be distracted of all these definitions as I went through it. But to enable it, to be able to refresh your memory what these are all about, if I highlight column B now by clicking on it, I'm now able to change the font color, which was white, to automatic. There we have it. They are now visible, and I can uncheck the wrap text option here, which now gives me all of those definitions. So you can refer back to those. So when you know what I'm asking you to do, if I click on the dialog launcher, you don't sit there scratching your head. You can go to a particular group of commands and launch additional features available within Excel. Okay, then I've got this next section moving across to key essentials. Key essentials are basically, as the name suggests, as I've done training over many, many years now, I've noticed that there are a couple of key things which some people don't quite grasp. And if you don't have these as a foundation, then there are many other things which you will struggle with. Being frequent Excel users, again, you'll probably be familiar with a lot of what I'm about to introduce you to, but there are some key things here which we need to be aware of. First of all, if I select a cell, it becomes the active cell. And if I start typing, so I start typing date, it will enter into that active cell. If I reselect a cell and start typing, so I put my name in here, it automatically overwrites that. And so the active cell basically becomes the cell of focus when I start making any edits or changes. The thing is, though, is that if I highlight more than one cell, so if I drag my mouse across multiple cells like this, there's still only one cell that's got the focus. So notice if I start typing now, start typing date again, it enters into that single cell. And not many people are aware of that. If I had to do it in reverse, so for example, if I had to highlight cells going this way, and I start typing, notice that it only enters into the one cell which is not grayed out. It's selected in the range, but it is not grayed out. And so even if I select a range of data like this, there is still only one cell which has the focus. Then it's always good to introduce you to keyboard shortcuts. Keyboard shortcuts are something that people love, especially if you're a frequent Excel user, because it makes you a lot more efficient. It enables you to keep your hands on the keyboard instead of gravitating towards your mouse. and it's been proven many times that it makes you a lot quicker when entering and working with data. So probably the most widely known keyboard shortcuts out there is Control-C and Control-V to copy and paste. So to quickly go through that, if you've never done this before, always hold down the Control key first. So hold down the Control key, then select C for copy. And then I'm going to move across to the right-hand side using my arrows this time, so I'm not touching my mouse. And I'm doing Control-V to paste. Another thing which is useful is the escape key, which enables you to exit out of this copy mode. So these marching ants, as we call them, are still running around date, which means it's still on our clipboard. If I press escape, those disappear. Another useful feature which is good to remember is Control-Z to undo. So if I do Control-Z, it undoes that copy and paste, and I'm back to where I started. Another useful feature as well is, or shortcut, is Control-X to cut. So if I use Control-X now and go across and Control-V, it basically moves it. It's a cut and paste as opposed to a copy and paste. Now, if you forget a keyboard shortcut, what a number of people are not aware of is that if you hover over the equivalent command on your ribbon, it will give you that particular shortcut. So here you can see if I hover over cut, it gives me in brackets underneath that Control and X, which means I can then use that shortcut as opposed to selecting the command from the menu ribbon. Likewise with copy, hover over that, Control-C, and there was my undo, Control-Z. You can see at the end of that undo that particular typing of text. And so those useful keyboard shortcuts are always good to remember, and as we go through this course, I will build on more and more shortcuts which make us more efficient. Now, one of the key things which I find a lot of first-time users struggle with is this option of being able to determine the difference between the various different mouse cursors that present itself around an active cell. So I've got here this cell here, date, as my active cell. The default mouse cursor is this fat plus sign. If I drag my mouse in that state, it simply highlights. It doesn't alter the state of the cell. If I go to the very bottom right-hand corner, though, you'll notice it changes from a fat plus sign to a skinny plus, otherwise known as crosshairs. And if I click and drag at this point, it basically takes what's in the cell that's active and overwrites wherever I drag it to. So if I drag it down, it will overwrite that particular column. If I drag it across to the right, it overwrites. Now, a number of people get confused between the two, and they end up overwriting data that they didn't intend to do. And that's where Control-Z, which I did there quickly, is a very good keyboard shortcut to remember. It's our Excel panic button. If I make a mistake, it's Control-Z and I undo it. The other third Excel icon around an active cell is this four-sided arrow. And you'll notice if I hover over the very edge of my active cell, I get a four-sided arrow, my mouse cursor stays. If I click and drag at this point and move, it's basically doing a cut and paste. So it's the mouse equivalent of doing a cut and paste. Control-X, Control-V would give you the same. And sometimes people get that wrong. Instead of going to the very bottom right-hand corner, they go just here, click and drag, and you end up moving it instead of replicating it. And so those three different mouse pointer states are key to being able to work with data in Excel. And you can see that highlighted here. You'll notice that as we step through this, this workbook doubles up as your notes. And so you can see clearly how it highlights the different three mouse cursor types and how they actually function. Then the key difference between entered and calculated cells is another key essential to be aware of. So you can see I've got two values here, 3 and 5, and I've got a third value, 8, which is obviously adding those two together. Now, when I select those cells and I look in the formula bar, the underlying value is that actual value of the cell. So here, this is 3, 5, and 8. And so if I change this value to 6, the only way I'm going to get that to compute is if I overwrite that and change it manually to 9. Whereas these two cells here are exactly the same as what those two were there. Let's go back to 5. But this cell here is now calculated because it's summing these two together. So that there is a calculated cell and is dynamic. So if this cell changes now to a 6, this one dynamically changes to a 9. And I can tell that it's calculated because when I select it in the formula bar, it has a formula as opposed to an actual value. Now you can also calculate with text values. A lot of people think calculations are limited to numerical values, but you can see here I have got a formula which we will look at a bit later on in the course, which concatenates, which means it joins together these two cells. And so if I to select that cell and change it to a hi as opposed to hello, you'll notice that this calculated cell also changes. And so that is a key difference between entered hard-coded values and calculated values. And that's a key to Excel. A lot of people use Excel simply to store information. So they're using a calculator to work it out. That defeats the whole purpose of using a spreadsheet. As much as possible, we use calculations. So we make one change and that cascades throughout our spreadsheet. Okay, then the fourth point, which we'll allude to as we progress through the course as well, is that a number of our features in Excel are not set in Excel, they're set outside within the regional settings of our PC or laptop. And three key ones to be aware of. If you've got this particular worksheet open on your own PC, you might very well see that your decimal is not a point, it's a comma. So you've got 10,5, not 10.5. And that's key when we start entering data because we need to be aware what our three key formats are set to. So decimal is one of them. You need to be aware of that. Thousand separator is the other. It can be a space, in my case it's a space, or it could be set to a comma. A date is what catches us out many a time. And so I'm going to teach you a quick little shortcut in which enables you to determine what your date format is set to. So you select the cell you want your date, hold down the control key, press the colon key, which is just 2 left of enter, and you get the current date, 1st of March 2019, and it puts it in the format that your regional settings are set to. So if you're an American logging into this particular session, you may very well have the third, so you have to have 3-1-2019 because you have the day and the month the other way around. And it's key that when you enter a date that you use that same format, because you could potentially be entering an incorrect date or a date which is not stored in the correct format. And so those are the three key things to be aware of, and we will elaborate further on that as we go through the course. And then finally, often when we first start working with Excel, it can be very overwhelming. We've got all these different ribbons to refer to at the top, and sometimes we can spend a good couple of minutes hunting through these to try and find a feature that we are specifically looking for. And so a very useful thing to remember is that we can right-click on any component in Excel and it'll give me all the options available to that particular item. So if I right-click on a cell, notice all the different features that I have access to. I can cut, copy, I can filter, I can do a whole lot of different things. If I right-click though on a row, I get a limited list because I can do less to a row than I can to a single cell. Equally, if I right-click on one of my worksheets at the bottom, I get a whole different menu which pops up, which is specifically applicable to that particular item. So everything that we create in Excel or work with in Excel has a right-click option, which then enables me to limit all the features which are available in the ribbons to that specific item. And so to put this into practice, let's say I wanted to create a hyperlink on this cell here called data input. So when I click on it, it jumps to my next sheet. So if you had no idea where to find hyperlink in amongst the toolbars at the top here, just right click on the cell and see if it appears. So if you scan through all these items that I can do in a cell, you can see at the very bottom here, I've got link. So that looks promising. Click on that. Here we have insert hyperlink. I'm wanting to go to a place in this document. So I'm going to click on that. So those are all my different tabs I got in this document. I'm just going to move to the next one, data input. Click on OK. I've now got a hyperlink. the classic of being blue and underlined, and if I hover over it now, it gives me a little hand, and if I click on that, it moves me to my next sheet. And so simply by right-clicking on that cell, if you had no idea how to put in a hyperlink, your powers of deduction would be able to take you there. Okay, this is exactly where we need to be on the data input sheet. And there are some good and bad practices of entering data. If you work in Excel, most of the time we need to enter data, and it's good to be aware of the most efficient way to do so. So I've got two categories here, first name and surname, and I'm simply going to select the first cell with my mouse and type in my first name. So I type in there, Mark. If I wanted to move now from that cell into the next column, don't press enter because that always moves down. If I press the tab key, it enters that content and moves across columns as opposed to moving down. So it's far more efficient than using the mouse to re-navigate to the correct location. So pressing tab moves me across. I can type in my surname. Pressing enter again now moves down. And if I started in a particular column, very cleverly goes back to the beginning of that column. If I wanted to edit a particular cell, you'll notice their surname has an R missing. And so if I wanted to edit that, rather than taking my mouse and double clicking in the cell, which is one way to do it, what I can do is, if it's close by, just navigate there with my arrow keys. I'm using my arrow keys, up and down arrow keys, to get there. And then I press the function key F2. Right across the top of your keyboard, you have function keys ranging from F1 to F12. Now, you have to be careful here because those function keys have a dual purpose. They can also control your volume settings, your screen brightness. Some of them also put your computer to sleep. And it depends whether you just press the function key or have to press the FN key, which is down on the left-hand side next to your control key at the same time. Now, my particular laptop, all I have to do is press the function key F2, and you can see I get into edit mode. My cursor is flashing there. If you press F2 and nothing happens, then you know you have to press the function key as well as the F2 key. Once you're in there, I can use my arrow keys to navigate through that particular content, get to the right location, correct it, and then press enter. And so that's a far more efficient way than having to navigate with your mouse and double click. If you make a mistake in a cell, so let's say I'm in edit mode in this cell here, and it's been a long day and I fall asleep on my keyboard and I end up with something like this, and when I wake up I realize I don't need to enter or don't want to enter that content. If you press the escape key, it basically keeps the original content there, comes out of edit mode, and all your hieroglyphics, whatever you entered there incorrectly, will be removed. And so that works when you either working with formulas or when you're just entering text. And so if you're following along with me, we're moving basically down to row number 11. We have got a date field here, which we're going to enter. And now we know the shortcut to enter the current date, and we might as well use that. It's Control and the colon key. So holding down Control, press the colon key, I have the date. Then if I wanted to enter my name in here, obviously I could just simply type it. But if I wanted to use a combination of these two cells, there's a key thing you need to be aware of when we're trying to merge data from two cells manually into a single cell. And so if I go now and select the cell, copy and paste, so Control C, and I move down here and Control V, that's fantastic. But if I want to take my surname and I copy and paste that, obviously if I select that cell and paste, it's going to overwrite it completely. So what I need to do instead is I need to take the content from the formula bar, or I need to double click into edit mode and select it from here. And so I'm going to use the formula bar option. I'm going to select it from there, Control C to copy. I then go into edit mode here, which is either F2 or double click, and then I can paste. And so to add content to an existing cell, you have to be in edit mode for both the copy and the paste, and then I can merge a whole lot of data into one cell manually like that. Cell number, I'm going to skip across because it always gives us issues, and so I'm going to avoid that one for now, and I'm going to go straight to vehicle reg. Okay, so as Trevor Noah suggests, we're obviously going to enter something fictitious because I'm not an honest killer. So I'm going to put in a fictitious registration number so that you can't moan at me on the freeway. Reason for visit, as Trevor Noah suggested, we're going to just put in a PVT. Tag number, that's that soggy tag that they hand you at reception that you carry around with you, and we're just going to give that a numerical value. I'm going to give it a numerical value of 3. Then time in, another useful shortcut that is similar to the date shortcut. Instead of pressing Control and the colon key, I'm going to add Shift to the mix. So it's Control and Shift and the colon key, and I get the current time. And so that now will give me today's time, exactly 11:38. We're almost halfway through our webinar. And I've entered the data in those particular categories. Now, there's a key thing that we need to make a note of if we look at the data that has been entered. The default cell format is general. You'll notice here, if I select any cell that I haven't entered data in, it's general. And there's a key thing that Excel does when I enter data in that general format is that it will always take text and align it to the left. You can see there's my text cell. Even though that's got a numeric component, it's still seen as text because I've got the ND registration. PVT as well as to the left. But anything that is numeric is aligned to the right. So you can see my tag number here is aligned on the right. And interestingly enough, my date and time are also aligned to the right. And now this is critical to working with data because most of us have date-based data. It's just the nature of data. It's always a point in time when we start capturing information. And so if I take this date of the 1st of March 2019 and I see what it looks like in numerical format, I actually change it to a number, I get the value 43,525. And that is basically the number of days since the 1st of January 1900. And that's how Excel works with dates. So irrespective of your date format, your format might read year, month, day, 2019, 0301, or as I alluded to earlier, you could have American format of the 3rd of the 1st, 2019. The underlying number or value of that cell will be exactly 43525 because it's a lot easier for Excel to work with dates like that. And so if your date doesn't align to the right, you know you haven't entered it in the correct format and you wouldn't be able to then compute and work with dates as they have been designed to work with. Same with time. Time is a fraction of a day. So if I take that and I convert it to a number, I get 0.48. So I'm 48%, almost 50% through my day. When we hit exactly 12 o'clock, then that would read 0.5 because it's halfway through the day. So time is actually stored as a fraction and date is a whole number since the 1st of January 1900. And if you understand that, then you'll start to understand why Excel does certain things to dates. And we won't get so frustrated when it starts converting dates to numbers, etc., etc. Okay, so the key thing here is that text is aligned on the left. Numbers, which now includes dates and time, are aligned on the right. What about a cell number now? If I type in a cell number, Excel automatically tries to convert that to numerical value, which is very frustrating because I lose my leading zero. It says you don't need a leading zero. I recognize you as a number and I'm going to enter it as such. And so to get around that, what we can do is we prefix a number we want to enter as text with an apostrophe. So I've put an apostrophe in first and then press enter. This actually comes from the old Lotus days. Microsoft copied them because that's how they entered text. And you can see here that now aligns to the left, and now with our new rule we've established, that is seen as text, so therefore the leading zero doesn't disappear. It does give me a warning. That little green triangle, there's a warning, and if I hover over the warning symbol to the left, it tells me exactly what Excel is moaning about. This number in the cell is formatted as text or preceded by an apostrophe. which is exactly what we did, so that it didn't hijack my 0 and convert it to a number. The other alternative would be to actually format that cell first as text. So if this one here at the bottom, if I change that first to being text, and we look at cell formatting just now, and then I start typing the number, you'll notice that automatically stays to the left because that was formatted as text from the get-go. It wasn't in the general format. So those are two ways in which I can force a numerical value to be displayed as text. And here's some notes just to remind us of those key things which we've learned in entering data. So we're going to take this Book of Truth entry, and we're going to take it and copy it to our next section and work with it there. So if you are following along with me, if you would just like to highlight those cells that you've entered by dragging your mouse across them, Control-C to copy, and then move across to the next tab, which is Excel Autofill. And in the first worked example here, we're going to simply paste. So select in that cell here of B9 and Control-V to paste. And what we're going to look at here is how each of our individual data types behave when we try and replicate it. As I referred to in the Key Essentials section, if you select a cell and go to the bottom right-hand corner and drag it down, it will replicate what you've selected over the cells that you're dragging. So if I take my name here and I drag it down, I just get that name duplicated all the way through the cells that I've dragged it through to row number 15. So basic text will always behave like that. So if I go to my PVT and I drag that down, it does exactly the same. However, Excel is always looking for a series. And so if I had to take my vehicle registration number and drag it down, notice what happens. The default is to increase that number by one value at a time. So you can see that vehicle registration number is increasing. This is often a frustration factor in Excel because it's doing something that I don't want it to do. At the moment here, we're looking at the defaults. And so the default means what happens without any other further intervention. And so an alphanumeric tries to generate a series. Cell number will do the same thing. Because it's basically the same as the vehicle reg, it's kind of numeric displayed as text. You'll notice that it tries to generate a series. Dates do exactly the same. It tries to generate a series, drag it down, and I get an increased value of 1 day at a time. And if I go to the time column in column H and I drag it down, I get 1 hour at a time. So based on that, you would suspect that a numerical value like 3 would then increase 1 value at a time and go 3, 4, 5, etc. But lo and behold, for whatever reason, Excel have left that to just being replicated. I'm not sure exactly why. It gets a bit confusing for a trainer to explain that there's not a golden rule. There's always exceptions to rules. I know, as my English teacher at school used to say, there's always exception to spelling, so that's never my strong point. But the exception in this case is that the default for a numerical value is that it simply replicates that value all the way through the cells that I drag it. So that's the default for all of those different data types. I'm going to take this example again, and we're going to experiment it with some of these different options. So I'm going to highlight those, Control-C to copy. I'm going to go down to this next example, Control-V to paste. Now there are a couple of examples even further down, and you'll notice that my marching ants, while they're still running here, means that I can repaste that content multiple times. I can go down to this example down here. I can paste it in preparation and my fourth example. And so as long as my marching ants are running, then I can repaste that particular copied text or a cell range. If I press the escape key now, though, it disappears. Great. Okay, so the default is what what was displayed here in this first example. What we're going to do now is try and get it to do the opposite. Now with these two, we can't get anything opposite because to try and generate a series out of my name obviously won't work, and same with PVT. So those are exactly the same. When it comes to alphanumerics, like this, my vehicle reg, if I drag it down, you'll notice that once I've dragged down, I have a little option, autofill option, which remains displayed on the bottom right-hand side. And if I select that, it gives me an option to override the default. So the default was to try and fill a series. I can override that by clicking on copy cells, and it automatically overwrites it, and I now copy those cells. And so that's one way to overwrite it. The other one, as hinted to by this section here with the control key, is to, while I'm dragging, if I know off the top of my head that this is going to generate a series and I don't want it to, if I hold down the control key at the same time, and if you can notice the little plus sign that appears to the top right of my big plus sign, that then enables me just to replicate it and do the opposite of what it would normally do. And so if I take all of these, I can either drag it down and overwrite by using the autofill option to copy the cells, or if I remember before I drag, I can hold down the control key and drag it down. And so that's a way to get Excel to do the opposite. Now remember, in the original, if I drag down a number, it simply copies that number down through those rows, whereas in this example now, if I click hold on the control key, it'll do the opposite now, which is to generate a series. Now I can get all of those to generate at the same time. And so if I use for my third example here, I'm going to highlight all of that data, go to the bottom right-hand corner, and drag all of it down. So to confuse things even more, when we highlight the entire range of data, which has got multiple different data types, and then I drag it down, Excel thinks, oh, maybe you are trying to generate a series. So this way, I'll generate a number. Notice the number, without holding down the control key or doing an overwrite, now increases one value at a time. And so it behaves differently when it's part of a group, whereas when it's individually, the default is just to replicate that value. So that's going to generate a series. If I wanted to simply take, let me just move up so that you can see the next example. So I'd take all of that, go to the bottom right-hand corner, hold down the control key at the same time. This is simply a replicator. So I drag that down. It simply replicates every single one of the values. So none of those are now trying to generate a series. So those are the different ways in which each of our different data types behave when I replicate the cell. And there's two ways to overwrite it. One, if I remember beforehand, to hold down the control key, or the other one to use the overwrite option. And you can see how this doubles up as notes. There's some basic notes at the top here explaining how to go about replicating cells. And then there's a nice little overview here on the right-hand side. Okay, moving on to our last section for today, before I just run through a brief overview of what we're going to be covering in the next couple of weeks. We're going to look at formatting cells. So formatting, as the name suggests, basically changes the way a cell looks. It doesn't actually change the underlying value. And where we find all our formatting options is under the home ribbon. So if I go to my home ribbon here, I've got three different sections: font, alignment, and number. So those are my three main formatting options. Within font, we have two of our other kind of subcategories, if I can call it that, which is the border options. And as soon as you see a little drop-down arrow next to a particular icon, it means there are a whole lot of more options available there. So that's my borders all summed up into one command icon. And likewise with fill. You can see to fill a particular cell, it also has a drop-down option that I can choose. So that is one way I can access my 5 different formatting components. The other one is to simply right-click on the cell that I'm wanting to do the formatting in, and I go to Format Cells. Now the shortcut for that is Control and 1. So if you hold down the Control key and press 1, you get the same formatting cells pop up, and you can see how these correspond now to the various different formatting features we have in our home ribbon. So starting on the left-hand side, number, that corresponds to my number formats. Alignment, here I have my alignment collection of commands. Font is my font, and then as I suggested earlier, the border and the fill have their own dedicated tab here, but within the shortcuts they have a single icon which can be expanded upon. And that's how I can access these various different formatting options. The other way to call up this format cells is also to click on the dialog launcher. So remember, if you can't find the formatting feature you're looking for here, click on the little dialog launcher. It opens up on the correct tab and the additional features I can find here. So for example, you'll notice that there's no option to justify text here. Whereas if I wanted to justify the text within the cell, which means that it lines left and right, I've got a justify option there. And so it gives you access to additional features which are not available here. So to quickly run through the 5 different formatting options that we have, I'm going to type in a number here of 10.5. Okay, so that value there is just 10.5. However, if I wanted to refer to that as 10 Rand 50, I'd rather display as such. And I can then change that to currency. So if I select that cell, go to the drop down here and select currency instead, notice that that automatically adds in the currency symbol, again from my regional settings. And because I'm South African, it puts in the Rand symbol. And it automatically adds an additional 0 so that I'm displaying the full number of cents in the cents column. If I reselect the cell though, the underlying value hasn't changed. It is still 10.5 or 10.5. The formatting is just different. I can't double click in here and remove the R. Notice I double click, it actually displays the underlying value. It's simply formatted to display a slightly different way. Now number formatting can often confuse one because often what you see is not what you get. And there's a whole dedicated section here on number formats which we'll go through in a lot more detail in the next beginning of the next session. And that is key to working with data. For now though, to apply a different format, all you need to remember is to select the cell you're wanting to format and then go and change it. So if I want to display this simply as a number, click on it as a number. Or if I want to display it as a fraction, as 10.5, I can select the fraction option. So you can see that exact same number displayed in different ways. Alignment, as the name suggests, it will then change the location of the content within a cell. And so my alignment collection of commands over here, if I wanted to put that into the center as opposed to left aligned, if I click on that, you can see now it moves into the center. Also notice that the options which have been applied to the formatting features which have been applied to that cell are then selected when I select that cell. So notice here alignment has that centered. If I reselect that number, notice that displays as currency. And so you can see what formatting you've applied by simply clicking on the cell and it will display that format within the various commands. There's some other alignment features which are quite useful. So moving our attention across to the right here, I've got column F. You can see here, if I select that cell, I've got a whole lot more text that I can see that's in that cell that what I can currently see. Now I could widen that column to be able to view that content. But in this case, I want to keep that column that particular width. And so the option here is to wrap the text. Now, if you remember in the beginning, we unwrap text to see all our data and our various different Excel. In this, sorry, let's go back here. Our various different Excel components. Remember, we unwrapped this particular column so we could see all the data. So it's the same concept here. Under my formatting of cells, I can wrap that text. Now you can see the column automatically, the row automatically adjusts so that I can see all of it. And we can then be able to view the full content without having to select it and view it in the formula bar. Another useful feature is to merge and center. Now, as a data analyst, I'm very reluctant to show you this because it often causes huge issues when we start working with data, but there are times where it can be useful. So if I wanted to take this data here and actually display it across all 3 of these columns for whatever reason, I can click on that, click on merge and center, and it actually merges all those 3 columns together. Just notice though that if I select the cell, only one cell still has the focus. It's still only G9. And so to be able to reference or work with that cell, even though it spans H and I, it only actually exists in G9. H and I are basically hijacked to view the full content of that. If I wanted to pop that into the middle of that box as well, I'd have to change my horizontal alignment, my vertical alignment, and click on middle align, and that now is centered completely in the middle of my merged cells. Borders, as the name suggests, I can place a border around a selected or a range of cells, and so if I select that, notice that the default at the moment is just an underline, and so if I click on that, all I get is a single line at the bottom. If I want different options, click on the drop down and I have multiple options to choose from. If I want to border all the way around the edge, click on all borders. Notice now then that the icon changes to all borders, and so the default now when I click on it will be all borders. And so if I go down here and I select a whole range of cells and I click on all borders, then I get, click on the border option, I get all the borders because that now becomes the default. Now, another useful feature to show you at this point, which not many people are aware of, is that if I have to now select that and delete, it doesn't delete the formatting, it simply deletes the content. So if I had contents in here in any of these cells, highlight those, deleting will delete the content, but the formatting stays. So a very useful feature to remove absolutely everything, content and formatting, is to highlight the cells you're wanting to remove the formatting from, and under the home ribbon on the far right hand side there's a little eraser. And so if I wanted to clear content, that's the same as my delete button. You can see there in brackets the shortcut is delete there. Then it will simply delete the content. If I wanted to clear just the formats and leave the content, I could do that, or if I wanted to clear everything, then that will remove the works. And so that enables me to delete all the formatting as well as the content on a particular cell. Fill, as the name suggests, is just to fill the content of the cell, the background color, and that's my good old paint bucket. The default is always yellow, so when everybody does fill cells, 50% of the time it's yellow. If you don't want yellow, click on the drop down and you can choose whatever color you want. I guess a good rule of thumb here, if you've got your font as being black, then you will need to have a lighter color, so it's better to choose a lighter option. But if you've got a really dark option, you can then change your font color to white. Now I skipped over font, and so if I wanted to change that font color to white now, go over here and click on white, and it's a lot easier to use. So dark fill colors, change your font to white, light fill colors, leave them as black. Another useful font feature, which not many people are aware of, if we want to change the size of a font, often people click on that and they kind of experiment and guess which one they want by using the drop down. If you simply want to enlarge it, you can bump it up here by using the enlarge font, or click on that to decrease the font size. So those are the basic different formatting features that we can apply. We're going to go and refetch our example that we've used, our honesty book entry. So I'm going to select that there from our Excel autofill sheet, copy that, move across to formatting cells, and I'm going to go and paste it in here. Okay, so if I had to apply what I learned now to this particular example, if I wanted to format all of these cells exactly the same as my headings, simply drag over multiple cells, I can then apply formats across all of those. And typically what we do with headings is we bold them, Control B is a shortcut for that, and then we can center them. Then if I wanted to apply formatting just to a single cell and reapply it, there's a very useful feature. And so for example, if I selected date here and I wanted that to be red, so if I click on this cell, drop down here and choose that to be the red color. If I wanted to reapply that across all of these cells, there are a number of ways I can do it. if I select that cell and drag the bottom right-hand corner across, now we know the default is that it takes that cell and replicates it all the way across. Remember this little autofill option? When I do it with text, there's an option to fill formatting only. So if I click on that, you can see that it applies all of those colors, but it doesn't, a color of red to the font, but it doesn't overwrite the actual cell content. So that's a quick way to fill that formatting across those cells. If that format is not in the, I can not right up against the format I'm wanting to copy, I can use my format painter. So if I simply wanted to paint the cells or the headers which had a numerical content, I could select that cell, click on the format painter, I get a little formatting painting brush here now, and I can then drag that across my cells, and it just puts that format over these cells. Then one final useful feature, which not too many people are aware of, is to actually repeat format. And what that does, it takes the last formatting you've applied and reapplies it to any cell that you got selected. So let's say I wanted to fill that background color yellow. So I go into here, select yellow, so that's not changed. Now let's say I want to make this cell also yellow, but I don't want to make it red as well. I simply want to apply the last format. I can press the function key F4, and it only applies the last format that I applied in the last cell that I edited. So I can click on any cell here, and it can then apply the formatting of the cell background color of yellow, and that's the function key F4. Control Z, undo that. So I'm back to my original set of data, and let's make that all red. Let's drag that across and just choose fill formatting only. So those are some nice useful shortcuts on applying formatting to multiple cells, and even cells which are not contiguous, meaning they're not joined together. All of that which I've covered is listed again in these basic notes, and then there's that key thing of being able to clear the formats of cells without having to delete all the rows again. You can then simply use that to clear those various different formats. So that there kind of brings us to the end of the very first session. You'll notice that your spreadsheet tabs at the bottom will run out at this point. You don't have any of these other ones here. And what I'd like to do at this point is to actually run through, just finish a little earlier, and run through all the different features which we're going to be covering in the next couple of sessions. I know a number of you obviously just opted to do the trial free first version to see what this course is all about. And you probably are quite intrigued as to the other content that we will be covering in the next 5 weeks. So I'm going to spend the next 10-15 minutes or so just to run through very, very quickly. Obviously, I'm running through 5 weeks worth of training of an hour and a half each in the space of 15 minutes. So I'm going to whip through this very, very quickly, but it will give you a nice overview of what we're going to be covering going forward. Okay, so here it goes. So week number 2, that'll be next week Friday, we'll be covering the orange section here. So first thing we're going to look at is number formats. As I said to you earlier, numbers can often, what we call, be presented in a facade. So you can see here I've got numbers, exactly the same number, 4.125, displayed very differently. And so you can see here, if I select that cell, still 4.125, but the format of that is very different. So we spend a lot of time looking at how that differs, and often what you see is not what you get. So for example here, that value is not 413, it's actually 4.125 displayed as a percentage, which multiplies it by 100. And so we spend a bit of time looking at that. We also look at the confusing thing of how sometimes Excel gets sums wrong. So here we're summing 2, 3, and 1 together, and we should get 6, but lo and behold, we get 5. Why is that? Why does Excel sum all that together and give me 5 and not 6? And we will look at that. And so we spend a lot of time looking at the various different number formatting features and how best to interpret them, and also, more importantly, enable them not to trip us up when we're working with them and think we're working with a value which is very different to the actual underlying value. Formatting worksheets, going away from cells, so a way to be able to format. Here I've quickly formatted all those columns to be ideal width for what data that I've currently got in that. I could look at something like freezing the pane so that I can freeze the top row, and when I scroll down I see everything in my row number 1, which is my heading, and when I've got more data, that becomes very, very useful. And so we look at the various different ways of formatting worksheets. We then go across to formulas. Formulas are key to Excel, so we spend a fair bit of time here looking at all the different operations. And so these now are all formula-driven cells. I change that value to 6, and all of those are automatically changing based on their operation. We then also look at functions, the difference between a function and a formula. So here I'm adding up those individual cells. Here I can apply a formula using a function, good old AutoSum, to add those all together. We then experiment by inserting additional data and seeing how it behaves. So if I inserted a new value here of 5, why does that one change to 25 and why does that one stay at 20? And we look into that. We then look at the common functions of sum, count, average, max, and min, which is basically applying that those various different functions to those cells. What happens when I delete a cell? What happens if I change it to a 0? I get very different results. So we explore the key difference between a cell which has a 0 and a cell that is empty. And so we spend a fair bit of time working on formulas. We also look at some exercises to apply those formulas now in context, and we also introduce you to the if function, which is a very useful way of putting values into 2 different camps. Then moving on to the following week, we will look at something called series generation, and this enables me to generate data in a very different way. We know from this particular session under the autofill option that when I generate a cell normally, it tries to generate a normal sequence of 1 numerical value at a time, so date automatically generates. I don't want that. I want a week at a time. And so I show you how to change the second value, highlight both of them, and when I generate it, I get now a series 1 week at a time, which is different to what the default settings are. And so we experiment how to do that, and then we apply the same example using a formula. Advanced copy and paste. Now this is fantastic. So normally if I copy and paste this, Control A, Control C, and I paste it here, I get absolutely everything, warts and all. And so I've got some very gaudy formatting that I don't want there. So if I do Control A, Control C to copy, right click, go to paste special, I'm going to select formulas and number formats. Fantastic. So I get all the data through with the data in its correct formatting. And what I can also do is I can paste over here my column widths. So I'm choosing here column widths. And so I've managed to take this information, paste it here again. All the formulas are intact. So my formulas are still working, calculating my net values, but I've left all the gaudy formatting behind. And I've also copied the column widths. So we look at advanced copy and paste and all the different options you can have there. Skipping over to the 4th week, we look at cell referencing. Cell referencing introduces us to Excel's golden rule. And so here we have a set of results, percentage set of results, and based on the pass mark, you can see it tells me whether it passes or fails. Now, if that pass mark had to change, I want to be able to change it here to 40%. Let's say it's a really tough test. And notice how these dynamically change. And so I'm going to show you how the formulas in here, which are calculating that, can dynamically reference a single cell within your spreadsheet. And it introduces us to Excel's golden rule, which says if an input can change, refer to it specifically in a spreadsheet, don't hard code it into your formula. We then look at graphs. Graphs are fantastic ways to visualize our data, and I'll show you how you can very quickly take data and put it into a graph. So I'm going to take that data, insert it, put it into a graph. There we have a very quick visual illustration of our data. and how quick and simple it is to change that graph. So if I simply went to the last 6 months, drag it down, and my graph has changed. And so we look at all the different ways of being able to build graphs, which give us a huge visual impact of our data. Then also introduce you to conditional formatting. So taking that same information, instead of using a graph, why not use something called data bars? Click on here, data bars, and that now gives me a graph within the cell itself. And so I don't need extra space to be able to find a spot for my graph. I simply have a very clear visual illustration of my largest value, which is up here, and my lowest value. And so we look at all the different types of conditional formatting. We look at sorting and filtering. So a way in which we can filter our data. And so, for example, here I want to put a quick set of filters on here. I can then pull out all the data in here which has the name color in it. It's American based, I think. There we go. So that's all the cells that have color in the product name. And so we looked at all the different ways in which we can filter and sort our data, and that's one of the examples we will use. Then in the 5th week, we look at printing. And here are some key notes on all the different printing features that we can use. And so an example of how printing can be useful, even though we try and go green these days, printing is key to being able to quickly get something into print format to show somebody or take home. And so we look at things like being able to repeat row headers at the top of each page. Because if I had to go and print this normally now, page layout, let's make the automatic column width here to 1 page, and I go File and Print. That row header there only is displayed on the top of the first page. And so if I wanted to display it on every page, I can simply do this. I can go to Page Setup, Print Titles, and repeat those 2 rows at the top of my page. So I'm going to go to Print Preview. So I hope your screen is refreshing quick enough to see this. You'll see here on the 2nd page, I have those headings displayed at the top of each page. So we explore all these various different printing options which enable us to get our Excel creation into the print format. Okay, skipping over to the last day, because I'm starting to run out of time and I'd like to field a few questions at the very end. It's the very last day, we look at ranges and tables. We look at the very simple way of being able to take a set of data like this, converting it into a table. Control T converts that into a table. Then when I apply formulas, I can simply apply a formula to one cell, and it miraculously enters that formula across all cells. My rows pinned to the top. I can even very quickly add a totals row at the bottom here, which is automating the sum of that particular column. And even if I apply filters, that totals row stays at the bottom. A fantastic feature. The more I've trained in Excel and the more I've worked with it, we convert more and more of our data to tables, and it introduces you to the power of converting a range of data into a table. Then we look at pivot tables, which is a very quick way to report on data. Now, if you take a look at this particular set of data here, we have got many cells. And so I'm just going to highlight across on the right-hand side here. If I highlight this column, I've got a total here of 8,400 rows and a sum of 4.3. I've got a summary at the bottom here. If I wanted to analyze this data, the quickest way to do that would be to insert a pivot table. So I'm going to say Insert Pivot Chart and Pivot Table. I'm going to put it on an existing worksheet over here. Click on OK. And if I simply wanted to report by region and gross profit, I tick those 2 boxes. And I've already got my report. Unfortunately, KZN, those of us in KZN, not doing too well. And I can quickly rank that. And literally with a few clicks, I've got a fantastic report which enables me now to give some meaningful insight into my data. So we explore how to create pivot tables. We then also look at VLOOKUP. which enables me now to look up data across two different tables. So if I wanted to now pull the client name through here from my list of clients, I can quickly enter a VLOOKUP formula. It says equal to VLOOKUP. Select the cell I'm looking up. Here's my range I'm looking at from. I'm going to lock those cells, which we will explain during the course. I think it's on session number 3. I want to return the third column, which is my client name, and I want an exact match. And so here, I'm automatically pulling through the client name from my client details, so I don't have to look up the value myself. And if the account number changes, then so does the client name. And so that is a quick whirlwind 10-minute tour of some of the features. I've left a couple out, but gives you a nice overview of the content which you will cover during this course. And obviously you will then get access to this same very spreadsheet I'm using to demo next week, so that you can start working through it and refreshing yourselves on the content covered week by week. So Shane, I'm pretty much done. I know we have got 10 minutes left according to our time schedule, and I don't know if there are any questions, but that concludes our very first session and gave you a quick whirlwind tour of sessions to come in the future.